And let's bring in former top U.S. diplomat to Ukraine, Ambassador Bill Taylor, for more. Ambassador, thanks so much for coming on. President Zelensky says Vladimir Putin is bluffing and doesn't really want peace. But you say Trump has the advantage today. Why?
Trump does have the advantage, Diane. He's got, first of all, he's on home turf. He's got home field advantage, which suggests that Putin really wants this deal. He really wants this meeting. He has been ostracized. You know, he's a pariah. Putin wants to show his countrymen, he wants to show Russians that he's actually not a pariah, that he can meet with President Trump. So Putin really wants this. He also wants it, Diane, in order to avoid the sanctions that President Trump has been talking about doing. But there's no indication yet that President Putin is ready to come to the table for a ceasefire, which would be required to have Zelensky there as well.
Earlier on Air Force One, President Trump said land swaps will be discussed, but the decision of what to accept ultimately is up to Ukraine. What sort of territorial concessions do you think Ukraine would accept?
We're not going to make any territorial concessions legally. The Ukrainians understand that Russia occupies 19% of its country. There's no challenging that fact. 19% is illegally occupied by the Russians. And the Ukrainians understand that they're not going to be able to push the Russians out of that militarily. So they're going to look for other ways to do that. That said, they're willing to agree that the Russians are there, but they will not agree, Diane, to recognize that occupied territory as part of Russia. And the Europeans are equally adamant. Do not recognize those occupied territories, that 19%, as part of Russia.
So what does that mean? We know you're there. We're not going to fight you on it, but we're also not going to say that it's legal?
Exactly right. Exactly right. We remember what happened after World War II, when West Germany never gave up claim to East Germany. They said they would not try to take it back militarily. The Soviet Union at that time dominated East Germany, but West Germany wanted to get into NATO, wanted to develop its economy and its democracy, and was willing to wait it out. The Ukrainians are willing to do the same kind of thing. That is, say they commit not to try to take back that 19% militarily, and move into the European Union, move into NATO, they would say, and develop their country, that 81% that's not occupied. But they recognize that the Russians are in that 19% for now.
You mentioned NATO. President Trump did say the U.S. could maybe provide some security guarantees to Ukraine along with Europe, but NATO membership is off the table, according to Russia. So what kind of a guarantee do you think would satisfy Zelensky?
Well, first of all, Russia didn't get to say anything about NATO. Russia can say all they want about NATO, but they have no standing to talk about that. But in answer to your question, the Europeans within NATO, but not as a part of NATO, are talking about a coalition of the willing. The Germans, the French, the British, and others are talking about putting military forces into Ukraine after a ceasefire to be sure that the Russians don't invade again. That's a security guarantee. A better security guarantee is membership for Ukraine in NATO. But as a second best, this coalition of the willing, of Germans, French, and Brits being the lead, would be a good security guarantee for the Ukrainians.
What are the best and worst case scenarios coming out of this meeting, and what outcome are you expecting?
Best case, I would say, Diane, is President Trump makes it clear to President Putin that he has the cards and he has leverage, and he's willing to use those cards and leverage to force President Putin to come to the table and agree to a ceasefire. Lead to negotiate a ceasefire with Zelensky in the next couple of days. That's the best outcome. A worse outcome, a bad outcome, would be for President Putin to come to the table in Anchorage today and say no. Say, I'm not going to negotiate a ceasefire. I'm going to continue to go after what I've been saying all along, which is to dominate Ukraine. President Putin understands that doesn't get him anywhere. President Putin leads. President Putin makes that statement, and President Trump makes it clear that that's not going to work, and he will put sanctions on. That's the worst thing. So that Putin comes, says no. Trump says, okay, fine. Sanctions are following.
Senator Bill Taylor, we appreciate it as always. Thank you.